Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Eric Linxwiler. Eric is the Senior Vice President of Retail Solutions at TradeBeyond, a platform that helps retailers, brands, and trading partners collaborate quickly and easily. So, hi, Eric. Thank you so much for being with me on the show.
Hey, Kelly. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and appreciate the platform.
Yeah, no, this is going to be interesting because my own practitioner background is in retail, and I'm also a shopper, I should say. So between that part of my professional background and just sort of loving all of the science that you can even see in retail on a consumer level, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. Now, I talked about what your title is and where you work, but that doesn't really give us a sense of your professional journey. So for people that are meeting you for the first time by listening to this show, what else is it helpful for them to know about your background?
Well, I don't like to talk about myself a lot, but
You have come to the wrong place.
like you asked.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with, I'm passionate about taking on and solving large, big challenges. And there's no bigger challenges than those that face tier one global retailers, today and over the past. Over the past 30 plus years, believe it or not, I've had the pleasure to work with some of the globe's largest retailers, assisting them in tackling supply chain operational obstacles, and generally doing that with technology or technological supported solutions. Along the way, I've certainly been able to work with some very talented people that have introduced digital enterprise software solutions to the retail ecosystem. And at each stop along the way, I try to gather up all my vital learnings and constantly push those learnings out into new innovation. Always striving to, in the end, deliver real value to the retailers and to my partners. And then 10 years ago, I was blessed with the opportunity to launch what we now know as TradeBeyond. The mission of TradeBeyond being to empower a friction-free and responsible supply chain sourcing platform for exclusive brands and for private label retailers. So I guess that's kind of what brings me to the conversation today.
Absolutely. Now, when you talk about tier one, for people that aren't in retail, how do you sort of define what it means to be a tier one retailer?
Right. Well, in our business, again, we're at the end of the day, we're a software company, so in our business, tier one is an organization that has a stated mission, a stated strategy that 40 to 50% of their product assortment will be private label or exclusive brands. And that amount of revenue that private label generates is north of $1 billion US turnover. Most of the retailers I work with are double-digit billion-dollar or even triple-digit billion-dollar US dollar turnover. So that's first and foremost. And then secondly, or in addition to that, would be organizations that have a very complicated supply chain, an international supply chain, with a deep and committed direct sourcing strategy, often vertically integrated direct sourcing strategy. So not to take anything away from smaller chains or smaller one-off.
Oh, absolutely.
Or two-off, retailers, but generally we're talking about hundreds of locations, tens of thousands of SKUs, and a lot of complicated supply chain obstacles.
Now, given all of that complexity, and whether it's having direct material supply chains or simply complex supply chains that involve both private label and also branded merchandise, it probably comes as no surprise to most listeners that testing something like AI would be top of mind for these companies? I mean, it's something that I'm thinking 2024 is sort of the year of like AI. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. AI must be part of the conversation.
Yes.
And I know this is something you and your team have been working on helping these retailers do. Can you give us a sense materially of where AI is being rolled out and what kind of an impact it's having at the tier one level in retail today?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Sometimes I'm concerned that we're overusing artificial intelligence, AI in our conversation, and we're not taking it to the next level and really putting context around it, around AI today. What are we really doing? What are the real use cases? Because we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. I mean, AI is going to continue to evolve in all different capacities, right? Generative AI, particularly for material development or merchandise development, particularly in the apparel space, has now been around and employed, for several years. But in our world, we are using AI to maximize efficiencies in assisting retailers with meeting the challenges they're having with the onslaught of legislation globally, in maintaining the integrity and responsibility of their supply chain operations. And what that means is we're helping to develop digital chain of custody and curated documentation of all the stops along the way that a finished good has to go through before it gets to the consumer. So one thing that we're employing is machine learning to scan and read documentation and flag our retail customers when certain risks potentially show up in the documentation that's associated with their products. That's really the biggest use case that we have today, and we've got others in the works, but practically speaking, this is actually employed and in use today.
And, I think it's interesting because I remember you and I talked about this in preparation for today's conversation, this idea that regulation is having a huge impact within retailing. And you had said clothing specifically, because when I think about industries that are being heavily impacted by regulation, I think financial services, I think things like mining, I think pharmaceuticals. Retail is not the first industry that comes to mind around regulatory things. I mean, is it concerns around, for instance, a textile supply chain that might go to a supplier in Bangladesh that has a good record or a less good record? Is that where the regulations are coming into play, or is it something else than that in a different place in the supply chain?
Well, it's coming from all angles, fast and furious, and really with limited consistency, if you will, or standardization probably is a better word. I mean, just you mentioned apparel and textile. Last year, throughout 2023 and now into the first few months of 2024, at any given time, I think there were 16 or 17, I got to get my numbers right, different pieces of legislation being considered specifically around fashion and textile only throughout the EU, right? So that's a big number, and for separate regulations, and that's not just in the EU, but same thing is happening for multinationals throughout the US and in Canada. Same things are happening in Australia. Same things are happening in Asian countries, Singapore, Japan. So you have a global retailer or brand trying to operate in multiple markets that is being forced to adhere to different regulations that are defined by different countries or different legislative bodies differently. So really a challenge today, and it's really piling up on retailers. I mean, they are exacerbated by the onslaught.
Yeah. And certainly retail is not a simple business. I mean, I know different segments of retail have different profit margins. I happen to come up in grocery retail. So you're talking about like pennies between cushions,
Yeah.
teeny margins. But the sophistication that often accompanies that, because that is what you need to stay in business profitably, is absolutely incredible. And if I don't think of regulation when it comes to retail, what I definitely think about is inventory. And that's something that we've heard a lot about. I'm sure it's a lot of where the analysis and optimization energy is focused. It definitely comes into play with the supply chain. I'd be interested to hear from you when you think about maybe what some of these retailers have learned over the last few years about managing their inventory and the effect that has on their balance sheet, whether they're making changes in supply chain, changes to ordering systems and procedures. How are they sort of absorbing what they've learned, but not necessarily assuming that all of it is going to carry forward just because we've been through such an extraordinary time that is not necessarily going to be fully connected to hopefully, to the next few years to come?
Yeah, complicated topic, Kelly.
Yeah.
And you're right, and you're open there. It's different depending upon merchandise or focus or type
Yeah.
of retailer for sure, from food to apparel to hard lines to DIY, right? So inventory and having too much inventory or not effectively allocating the inventory to the right purchasing regions is a constant challenge for retailers. I think what we have learned as a collective community within the retail ecosystem is that we need to be more agile in our thinking. And in order to be agile in our thinking, we have to be able to not only react,
Yeah.
but foresee. And in order to react and foresee, what I'm seeing retailers now really put actions behind is putting real tools in place, right? The only constant now is change, right? You cannot assume that things month to month, quarter to quarter are going to operate the same way. And so we have seen that retailers are really leaning into technology solutions to help them have tools in place to make fast moves, particularly around inventory decisions, but also to be able to anticipate what might be coming down. Better analytics, better vision, better control tower platforms that are allowing them to make better decisions.
Yeah. Now I'm interested in your comment about foresight, because companies, decision makers, whole industries think about time differently, right? One company's real time is another company's short or medium term planning, right?
Mm.
When you look at some of these different retailers, how far into the future would you say they're planning at sort of what level of confidence? So maybe they have like absolute blue skies some number of years into the future, but how do you find that a lot of them are thinking about the dividing lines between blue skies, midterm planning, short-term planning, in terms of just their certainty about the business conditions they're going to be operating in?
Yeah, I think it's more short term and midterm, frankly. You do see you do see blue sky thinking particularly in our customer base, with those that are working to develop particular materials or to apply science to particular synthetics. You see complicated production around, footwear is a great example. Technology, of course, as well. I mean, come on. But when you're thinking, what might a collection look like in 3 years? Well, I'm developing materials, some that are going to succeed and some that are going to fail, maybe that far in advance. But most of the planning and most of the retailers that I'm dealing with that are kind of the day-to-day consumer goods retailers, it's more near term and midterm, because there's a lot of dust out there with regards to the economy. There's a lot of dust with regards to legislation. Somebody mentioned some number to me. I'm not going to quote the number, but we're in an election year, not just in the United States, but I think it's upwards of maybe 30 different potential elections
Wow.
happening all in the same year
Yeah.
right now, globally around the world. So lots of dust in the air, and that affects retailers' thinking. They don't want to get too far ahead of themselves.
Yeah. Now, you had mentioned previously too that one of the words you're hearing a lot in your conversations with these retailers is stuck.
Hmm.
What context are you hearing that word or that sentiment from them in?
Yeah, well, similar to the topic we were just talking about, a little bit stuck kind of in between the near term and the
Mm,
midterm, right? Where do we go? Um, not to continue to come back to the same topic, but one place where we're seeing folks get stuck is around this area of um, meeting the legislative requirements for labor and for material traceability.
mm,
There's no shortage of different solutions that are coming to market to meet these needs on behalf of the retailers and the brands. And the retailers and brands are trying to kind of sort out and weed through who's real, who's not, what's got legs, what doesn't. And what ends up happening is they're in a constant state of analysis rather than making decisions and executing and moving forward with action. So that's kind of what I mean when I say stuck. They're having difficulty differentiating between um, um, what they actually need versus what
yeah.
would a wish list look like of perfection. They're trying to strive for the wish list and fulfill all the requirements with maybe one or two providers, and that's probably not possible, but they can't come to grips with that just yet. So
Yeah. Now, every time, as challenging as it is sort of an opportunity for people with a mindset or an attitude or an approach that matches it particularly well. And so I would be interested to know, as challenging as this time is and all of the different things that are facing retailers, is there either a particular kind of mindset that you're finding is well suited, especially around decision making right now? Or is there something that decision makers within retail can do to shape their mindset to better set them up for success in the conditions that we currently find ourselves in?
wow, that's a mouthful. I'd almost have to be a qualified McKinsey analyst to come. I think.
You have the blue shirt on, Eric. You're halfway there.
Okay. All right. Well, um, how to unpack that one a little bit. I think that the decision makers, going back to my previous statement on what am I hearing when people say that they're stuck, decision makers inside of the larger retailers have come to grips with the fact that they do need to move forward,
Yeah.
right? Particularly in supply chain automation, supply chain operational automation, supply chain, and I've been in it a long time. When it came to moving forward with digitalization, folks would kind of just look at it and see a very complicated landscape and sweep it kind of off the desk
Yeah.
and say, you know what, we're going to focus on day-to-day operations. We're going to focus on store operations, on point of sale operations. We're not going to look at the bigger challenges. And today, people, the decisions have floated up to the boardroom, and the decisions are now being made to move forward, to actually execute. So the mindset is no longer sit, time to go. We have to make some decisions here. Again, change is constant. We got to be prepared for the change. Let's put the tools in place. So I have seen that. I have seen decision cycles in my business, which could in the past, that people are making big investments, physical
Yeah.
investments, as well as commitments to, long-term technology commitments that they can't just replace. So it might take them 2 years, 18 months, 24 months to make a decision. I'm seeing these decisions now made in 4 and 6 month timeframes. So that's a big change
Yeah.
that we've seen, at least in my world.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because it does sort of come back in a way to what we were saying before about regulation, that a lot of regulations tend to be sort of on that big picture level that you were talking about, companies sort of in the past saying, oh, maybe another day, right? Today, I'm going to focus on point of sale. I'm going to focus on ops. But when the regulation coming down encompasses your operation and the operations of your supply chain, right, or requires you to have that traceability, it does sort of create urgency and elevate the need to tackle those bigger picture challenges simply in order to be compliant, right?
Right. Well, to stay in business,
Yeah.
you know, nothing, very little gets done until it becomes law. And then when it becomes
Yeah.
law, well, now you got to do it, right? Which is interesting in our business, just kind of a little play on that. The decision makers, the stakeholders that traditionally I work with in my business, they come from merchandise, they come from sourcing, they come from costing, um, they come from compliance, but at a product level.
Okay.
Today, I'm taking calls from the legal counsel. Today, I'm taking calls truly from the CFO's office and
Okay.
even from the CEO's office, because they can no longer sweep it under the rug because it is law.
Yeah.
And to receive a withhold release order from customs today, that could mean 1 container, 2 container loads of merchandise that misses the market by 2 or 3 months. And when you miss the market by 2 or 3 months, you're not getting it back.
Yeah.
It's gone. And so, the executives that we work with today are saying it's time. We can't ignore it. We must move forward.
Yeah. Now, Eric, we have a tradition here at the Sourcing Hero. Every time a guest comes on the show for the first time, I offer them a pair of questions. So I'm going to do that same thing with you. I'm going to give you 2 questions. You can choose whichever one you like. And I promise you, as many times as I have heard different answers, there is no such thing as a wrong answer to either of these.
Uh-oh.
So your 2 options are, what
Okay.
does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or if you want to look at it a little bit more big picture, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Wow. Okay. I think I can give, maybe for me, for the way I think,
Sure.
maybe I merge these together and I think about heroism and choosing heroes. Um, I am committed, Kelly. I'm a committed believer in the collective IQ of the room. Um, and if I think of the hero in that room, the hero in that room is the best listener. And the one in the end that curates all of the ideas, summarizes everything that's been heard or bantered about, and kind of synthesizes it down into action.
Yeah.
Action that then is taken on by the complete team, which then culminates in real, meaningful, measurable results. So for me, I mean, if I think about heroism in the context of our business, that's kind of what it means to me. It's like who can take all the smartest people and all the information and put us on a path forward.
And that's ultimately what everybody's looking for, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it's complicated everywhere. There's some type of regulation all over. And we do need people that are willing to not necessarily take the spotlight, but sit back, take it all in and think. And if you can chart a better path, even a fractionally better path than somebody else, I totally agree with you. You've had a heroic impact on the journey that whole organization is going to take. Now, Eric, if people are just meeting you for the first time through this show and they want to connect with you, learn more about you, more about TradeBeyond, pick your brain on retail, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, well, I'm an open book. I think through my socials is the best to get to me specifically. You can find me easily on LinkedIn. There's not too many Linxwilers out there. I'm the one in San Diego, California. And also, please, you could visit TradeBeyond.com, where you could find direct access to me on our contact page.
Excellent. Well, Eric, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.